Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And of course, Labour has used its opposition day today to raise the critical issue of waiting times in our National Health Service here in Scotland, because it is a reflection on an issue that every one of us has a stake in. It is our communities, our family members, our relatives, our colleagues and friends who are at risk as a result of the NHS not performing to the best it can. And that is a responsibility this Parliament must take cognizance of, because it is the single most important area of public policy that this Parliament has to deal with. And the facts, I'm afraid, are stark and are incontrovertible. And despite the Government's attempts to erase these facts in their amendment to Labour's motion today, they remain. Almost 825,000 patients are currently on NHS waiting lists for tests and treatment in Scotland. That is more than the combined population of Glasgow and Dundee. It is simply unsustainable and unacceptable. That creates a huge national pressure. It means we have a sicker population and a vicious cycle that continues to affect every area of public life. Long waits have continued to rise, despite the First Minister's promise to eradicate them entirely, so we are not seeing an effort to get ahead of the problem at a sufficient rate. The 12-week treatment time guarantee, indeed, has been broken 680,000 times since it was introduced, the equivalent of more than the entire population of Glasgow alone. And the Government committed to delivering 55,500 additional procedures, which has not been met. And indeed, the Minister, in her closing remarks, mentioned that areas of improvement include CAMS waiting lists. Well, I'm afraid this is a bit of a mirage, because I investigated what was going on in Glasgow and discovered that the only reason they have been going down in Glasgow is because face-to-face consultations have been substituted for telephone consultations. That is simply not good enough, Minister, and it is not good enough to come to this chamber and make that sort of misrepresentative characterisation of what is actually going on in our CAMS system. As I said, these are our families and friends who are languishing on these waiting lists, awaiting care that they desperately need while their health and overall outcomes worsen. These are the people who email us on a daily basis. These are the people who come to our constituency advice surgeries in desperate situations, eager to get support. And it's not good enough for the Government to simply deny their lived experience, their reality. It is our duty as parliamentarians to give voice to their frustrations and their difficulties. The Scottish Government talk about waiting well, but unfortunately people are dying while waiting. And we've heard numerous examples of the terrible situations that are going on. Indeed, 18,390 patients died in 2022 while stuck on an NHS waiting list. And there has been a 39% rise in deaths since before the pandemic in 2019. So it simply isn't good enough for the Government to use the pandemic as an excuse. I think the member for Kilmarnock and Irvine Valley ought to listen more to his constituents in that regard, instead of patronising them in the way he did in his speech. In fact, Ms Boyatt, member for Lothians, did highlight our excellent NHS clinicians, but they are being betrayed too. They are being betrayed too. They are not just working in obsolete facilities like the Edinburgh Eye Pavilion, but oncologists who have come to this very Parliament in the last few weeks told us in devastating terms that they are watching cancer patients go from being treatable at the point of diagnosis to terminally ill. Indeed, I've met them personally in Glasgow's hospices. That is a betrayal. It is an extrajudicial death sentence that has been visited on the people of Scotland in some instances. That is the reality of what's going on. That is what taking responsibility means. It's not just saying it, it's dealing with it, it's addressing it. And we all have a stake in this matter. Yes, I have to give way.
Briefly, Alistair Allen.
I thank the member for giving away. Does he also accept that taking responsibility means not committing yourselves for 2 years to Tory spending plans?
Paul Sweeney.
Well, that's simply not a characterisation that's true. The fiscal rules being set are about improving economic growth by applying discipline to public spending. Here's a good example. The Government sits here impotently denying that they can invest in national treatment centres because of capital spending constraints, whilst wasting £1.2 billion on delayed discharge. That is incompetence, and it simply does not stand any scrutiny to say that the ability to undertake capital investment is not available. This is about undressing a vicious cycle. I urge the Government Ministers to stop thinking like accountants and start thinking like economists, like the Audit Scotland reports have urged, because this is all about connecting up a whole system. The member for Highland and the Tories, Mr Mountain, highlighted just one example, which might be more benign, about hearing aids. But this is backdoor privatisation, because it basically means you cannot access dental treatment, you can't get hearing aids, you can't get eye tests. So those who can pay and those who can't languish and suffer can't go to work, can't actually function as citizens. We get a sicker population and a less economically productive society. This is the vicious cycle this government has to address. It simply does not stand and point at other parts of the UK. Take responsibility and address these issues, as we should here as parliamentarians in Scotland.